flawless for PSLs and proving yourself against the top European teams. At least for US soccer, that is. Hey everyone, welcome back to Talking Soccer. I'm your host, Justin Horniker, and today we are going to go through the most recently announced US women's national team scheduled friendlies. Of course, we already knew about the game in England, but they're also going to be playing a game in Spain a few days later, part of that international window. And then just announced we'll be hosting 2 games against the number 2 FIFA ranked Germany in Fort Lauderdale and I want to say New Jersey, potentially. Somewhere in the Northeast. I don't have it in my notes. But anyway, 2 home games against the number 2 ranked Germany. And these are going to be real interesting because as fans, we've been clamoring for this level of competition. That's all we've wanted all summer, especially after the only hard game we've had this year against Canada, who at the time was ranked number 6. And we kind of squeaked that one out. We had missed a lot of great chances, and we're only able to convert a penalty late in the game. And you can look at that starting 11 as Pugh, Morgan, Smith, Horan, Sullivan, Lavelle, Fox, Sauerbrunn, Cook, Huerta, and Nair as the goalkeeper. That starting 11 is largely what we saw throughout the friendlies this year as well, of course, with the changes at left back, which, will probably be different come the time of these friendlies and come the time of World Cup, obviously. But definitely by the time of those Germany friendlies, as Crystal Dunn will be, getting back to pretty full fitness by that point in time. But it just gives us an option to see what this starting 11 that Vlatko seems committed to will do against harder competition. And it's going to be interesting because at the point when we played Canada, the top 3 weren't in the form that they're in now. Both Pugh, Morgan, and Smith are all having fantastic NWSL seasons. Something that, gotta just roll with that level of confidence. And if they had this level of striking confidence in that Canada game, I think the scoreline's a little bit different than that 1-0 win. But we have many other options in that top 3, and I think fans are just wanting to see what that looks like. And of course, when you're talking about, injuries, players coming back, like I said, Crystal Dunn should be back in the mix. Kat Macario should be back in the mix. And it kind of works well with what would be going on with the NWSL at the time, as well as Kat Macario already being in Europe. So that's like a no-brainer call in to me. And she gets called in when she's healthy. So I don't want to say like she wouldn't be called in otherwise, but it makes it a little bit easier and, a little bit easier to throw in that starting lineup as well. And then you also wonder what happens with Mia Fischel, who has been rumored to be around the fringes of the U.S. team. Mia Fischel scored 9 goals for Tigres this year. So she's another striking option that has played really well and gives the U.S. something different out of that front 3 as well, which I think is well worth exploring. But it's great to see that level of competition, but this roster isn't going to be as cut and dry as we might think it is. We're not just loading up the USWNT database and throwing them into England, into Spain, and then home against Germany those 2 times, because these games will also be happening smack dab in the middle of the NWSL playoffs. So by the time of the England and Spain game, it'll be just after the first round, and in between that game and the Germany games will be a semifinal and a final. So Vlatko, when he calls these players in, should be very cognizant of their NWSL obligations as well, because that's a lot of minutes going around, especially for players who are at the end of their NWSL season. They've been playing a lot of soccer, especially those international players. They've been traveling a lot. That's really hard on the body, and I know that they'll probably take that into consideration. But if they don't, you could see more of these injuries popping up that we've kind of seen around the national team relatively recently. It seems like they don't do as good of a job of handling that NWSL load as we, as fans, would maybe want them to. Time and time again, your national team players are coming back hurt, which is kind of the name of the game, right? You're playing those extra minutes. And NWSL coaches need to be a little bit better with that minutes restriction as well. I think it's something the league could do more of and could do better of. But at the moment, Flacco is going to need to take that into consideration as well, especially if you want an NWSL that, has to have its marquee players, has to be a strong league when it's putting on its final in DC in primetime on CBS. Like, that's such a big thing for this league. And could you picture Alex Morgan and Sophia Smith both somehow getting injured in one of those Europe games, and then Portland having to deal without them, or, San Diego having to play in a final without Alex Morgan? Like, those are the horror scenarios you can kind of picture in your mind. Don't picture it, but you could, hypothetically, you could picture that in your mind. And there's a lot of juggling to be done by Flacco at that point, because the relationship between NWSL and the women's national team is in flux a lot of the time, especially with both having their separate CBAs now, and with NWSL kind of, being put on this bigger stage than what it has been before. NWSL needs to start pulling its weight a little bit more, just like we see in men's leagues. This happens in men's leagues all the time. Sometimes they don't send players to friendlies, or they send them on minutes restrictions because they have important games coming up. And just because it's the U.S. Women's National Team and all the prestige that comes from just playing for that team, there are plenty of good players around the fringes of the Women's National Team that can be called up without really putting the strain on your players who are in the playoffs, who are in the finals in these big NWSL situations, are your players who just need a break coming off a long year of playing games. But Flacco's in a tough position as well, because these last rounds of friendlies to close out 2022 are going to tell him a lot about what that starting roster could be for the 2023 World Cup, and what that, finalized roster, that starting lineup should look like. And you can't really do that if you don't have players playing in these games against top teams that are going to be showing up. That's the other thing too. England will probably play their strongest 11. Spain will probably play their strongest 11. Germany will probably play their strongest 11. Now, their season will be in kind of, I guess it would still be early season, so they might send more than you would think. But, it's always something to consider with where we are in world soccer, where we are in the schedule, and with NWSL and the rest of the world being on different, slightly different schedules. It's going to lead to some mismatches with the national team as well. But if we want the NWSL to be taken seriously, if we want it to really punch above its weight, and not even, but punch at its weight as one of the strongest leagues in the world, and definitely the most competitive leagues in the world, we need to make sure that it is at its strongest on the national stage. You see this from what the WNBA has done in these playoffs. Strong teams going at each other. There's been a lot of excitement with women's sports in general, but you see that on the men's side too. You don't want your strongest games being played with injured players or not your marquee players. But is that necessarily the purview of the national team? That's what we have to kind of grapple with ourselves. And I would want to know what you think about that in the comments. Let me know if you think that Flacco should take into effect what NWSL teams want, if you think that's in his purview, or if you think that NWSL teams, organizations are just going to have to deal with it. If we lived in a perfect world, these NWSL players who are in the playoffs, who are gearing up for the finals, at this moment of those Europe games, would be allowed to stay at home if they want to. I know some players just want to go play with the national team, especially with the level of advanced pay on the line. But I'd want to see those players play, get rested up. That's an extra 10 days that you can heal your body a bit. And it gives some of those players who are around the outskirts of the roster an opportunity to step in and play. And I think that's always good. You saw that with the call-ins for this past level of friendlies where Haley Mace was able to get in, someone who's been in the U.S. team before but has worked a long way to get back into it and has had a fantastic season for the KC Current this year. But that's the strong point of the NWSL, is that so many players on, like, each team could be called into the national team and be very good. So let me know what you think about the national team down below, and if you think that these games will have any impact on the NWSL final. Of course, if this is your first time watching me, make sure you punch that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, because not enough of you are liking it, and We'll talk soon, everybody.